Welcome to the Elokus channel. This is class number 16 in the first discourse, Shehikdimu 5672. The first discourses are all for the schus of Refuah Sheleimo for Avraham Ben Parvin. May he have a complete recovery amongst all the ill of the Jewish people. May his family be blessed with much blessing. So we were learning over here, we're holding in the end of chapter number 3, very close to the end. We were learning in this chapter that the reason why, the meaning of an Or Pnimi, the reason why the internal light becomes so specified and divided in the limbs, each particular, how the limbs have become so unified with the limbs, how the limbs and the organs have an impact on the energy. That's because essentially it's an Or Pnimi, it's a limited light. The soul is infinite. The soul contains within itself, however, hidden in the soul, and you don't detect them, but hidden in the soul are these specified powers, which when they're in the soul, they don't seem to be at all specified, detailed, and limited, but they really essentially are. And when they come out in a form of limitation. And as we're learning right now, we're learning in general the life force of the neshama that goes into the body, which is the general or pnimi power of the soul. We find that it divides itself. It's in a state of division in the limbs. It doesn't come equally in the entire body. The higher powers of the soul go in the head, and the head has much more energy, has a much higher and deeper level of chayos, of life, than the other limbs. The midsection of the person has a lower form of energy. The energy is not as powerful. It's not as refined. It's not such a high power. And then the legs have even a lower form of life. That's the general division of the person. Roish, Toich, and Soif. The head, the center, the midsection of the body, and the midsection of the body, and the legs, which is the least and has the least energy of the soul. And now he continues and he says, "Ukemoi kain," and it has to do with the nature of the vessel. The head is made up of a more refined vessel. The material of the head and the brain and all the organs of the head are more refined, so they can receive a higher level of energy. The material of the midsection of the person is less refined, so it receives a grade B level of energy. The legs are more coarse, and they receive a grade C level of energy. It's all pointing to the idea that the energy is divisible, which means essentially it's not infinite. Anything that's infinite is not really divisible. Something that becomes divided and sectioned and pieces is a sign that from its very origins is limited. And now he continues and he says, we find the same thing not just in the kochos, in the powers as they enclose themselves in the body, but also in the powers when they enclose themselves one power in another power, which we discussed earlier in the discourse, that the intelligence flows into the emotions, and the intelligence also flows into the motorizing powers of the body to add a certain level of sophistication, a certain level of intelligence to a person's movements of hands and feet, as we discussed about an artist and dancing and so on and so forth. So he says here too, you see that it's not equal. It's not like the energy of the mind is uniform. When it goes lower, it goes equally into all the limbs. It's not that way. It goes in a very, very specific manner. So as he says, as follows: in the clothement of the limbs one and the other, the higher power becomes enclosed in a lower power, like the intelligence that becomes enclosed in emotions, and also in the power of movement, and the walking. The intelligence makes its way down to influence them as well, like we said earlier. It comes in a state of division, like we said earlier. That the light of the intelligence that becomes enclosed in the emotions is the external element of the intelligence. That means the inner intelligence does not go into the emotions. We learned this in a couple of classes back. The main element of the intelligence is to think in the abstract, unrelating to a person's emotions. It's just a lower level of the intelligence. It descends into the emotions. And in the power of movement, of the body, there is another element, there is intelligence that goes there as well, but it's the tail end of the intelligence. He calls it the intelligence of Maisa, of action, not intelligent intelligence, but active intelligence. It's not the essence of the intelligence at all. The etzem and the essence and the substance of the intelligence is only there in the brain. So you see how it's divisible. Even though it reaches lower, it reaches in a very limited fashion. And the same is also in the other powers, like the emotions. He says, take a look. Even the power of motorization, the power of movement, which is to be found in the hand and also in the leg, it's not equal. The ikr koyach hatnua, the main power of movement, the main power of movement is in the hands. The hands of a person have the skill of movement. The legs also have a power of movement, but the legs' power of movement is only does one thing mainly. It walks. And we said earlier it can dance, fine, but it's not really, it doesn't have such a range. In a person's hands, there's so many, you can fine-tune your power of movement to so many different activities. You can build, you can paint, you can sew, you can write, you can play musical instruments. There's tons and tons of things in which a person's hands can do. The feet are very simple. The feet do one activity. They walk, they run, and that's about it. That's showing us that the power of movement is its primary residence, its primary faculty are the hands. The feet receive a very external part of the power of movement. And that is because because the light and the energy of the soul is very much tailored to the level of the vessels. It becomes less from level to level. The kol zeh and all of this is hu mipnei shezeu is galus pchenes hapnimi sheyesh benefesh. It's because from the very get-go, all the kochos of the nefesh, all the powers of the soul are pnimiistic powers. Because they're pnimiistic powers, they are limited, and because they're limited, they have division in them. It's not the nefesh itself. Soul itself, if it would reveal itself, the energy of the soul, it does also, not just if, its energy is indivisible. We're soon going to learn about will. Will doesn't divide itself. It doesn't get sectioned. It's a sweeping force that encompasses the entire body, all the powers. Everything is direct. Everything is influenced by this one powerful, indivisible force. But with the other kochos, because they're not the soul itself. They're powers in the nefesh. For that reason, they are so divisible. Kitzer. Now we do the summary on the third chapter. The ikar and the main reason is ki hakoychos hem pnimiyim. Remember, we say after every chapter there's a little summary. Here we go. The real reason why the kochos, the powers, are so affected by the limbs, and the limbs are so influenced by the powers, It's because the powers are internal powers. Hainu mugbolim be'etzem. That means essentially they are limited. V'hanefesh, and the soul. She'ubilti mugbeles. The soul itself, which is a limited entity. Koileles b'toicha, includes within herself koichos mugbolim. She contains within herself limited powers. Rak behiskalalusan be'etzem and bilti mugbolim. Rather, when they are included in the essence, they're not limited. These very powers, we discussed this earlier in the earlier classes. When they're in the soul, they are part of the soul itself. In the soul, you can't see the power of the intelligence. You couldn't see the power. We discussed this the other day, like in the earth, how you have all the powers of all different vegetables and all different plants. And yet, fruits and plants and everything, it's all in the ground. But when they're in there, they're not specified. Same as the kochos in the nefesh, they're not limited. But they're really there. In order for the soul to project these powers, to produce these powers, the soul needs to limit itself. The soul has to contract itself. In other words, when the soul, if we might say, spits out these powers, the soul needs to contract from its limitlessness and focus a limited energy out of itself. Now, the manner in which the soul contracts itself is to each limb differently, to each part, to each part. To the head, it will focus a higher form of energy. To the other part of the body, a lower form and a lower form. That's the summary of this chapter. With this, so now let's begin. That concludes chapter 3, and we start now chapter 4. See, till now we were learning when he said that the energies, when he was saying that the energies are manifesting in the limbs in a limited fashion and in a divisible fashion, as he discussed the sections of the soul, how the soul kind of sectionalizes itself in the limbs. Now he's going to say, forget about the limbs. Each one of these kochos pnimim, you can see limitation in the power itself, not just in relationship to its vessel, to its container. Two things you see. You see it's limited, and there is division, and there are parts and pieces in the power itself. Like the power of intelligence. He's going to give an example. Every intellectual idea does not come in a manner of simplicity and limitlessness. But rather with limitation and with division. So what does that mean? We're going to have to get a little bit more very subtle. We're going to have to be able to imagine subtlety. Every time you have an illumination of intelligence, anytime you have an idea, the idea is sensed. You can feel that the concept that you're feeling, that you're experiencing, is a limited thing. It's not an infinite energy. And not like will. When will comes forth like a mighty storm. We can see it obviously. And the reason why our will does not always operate as a mighty infinite thing is because our intelligence, our mind, can filter the will and weakens the will. But the will itself is like a wind blowing on an ocean, over an ocean where there is no. Why is the wind so strong over the ocean, by the sea? Is because there's nothing to break it down. There are no walls. There's no barriers. When the wind is coming into a city where there are buildings, and so that it breaks the force of the wind. In an open field, it gets very windy. and also in the ocean and something like that. Will and desire comes like a tornado. It comes with a tremendous force. You see it with little children. When they want something, think about a 2-year-old, the terrible twos. The kid lays on the floor in a temper tantrum, and they kick and they scream. And when you're going through it, you're wondering if this kid will ever stop. Is this going to remain this way for 100 years? Because the force that they are projecting is almost like a limitless force. Because children don't have so much mind to temper with their will. So when their will comes forth, I want, it's cuckoo, it's crazy, it's limitless. Intelligence doesn't work that way. When intelligence comes forth, it comes forth always in a limited fashion, with a limited energy, with a limited light, not boundless. Comes in limitations. Levad, in addition, in addition to the fact that every intelligence is about something specific. You're conceiving an idea about something. It can be in medicine, it can be in astronomy, it can be in science, it can be in math, it can be in Hasidus, but it's about something specific. Well, that, he says, will is also that way. When you want something, even though the will is a force, but the will is about something. The kid wants a candy, the person has a will for money, or you have a desire for something specific. So that there is, he says, Shekenu gam beratzon, he says it into parentheses. The fact that it's directed towards something specific, that will also has. However, here we're saying more than that. The essence of the light and the revelation is a limited light. Shegam or seichel shaba b'havshata. Even a very abstract concept, even something that is really abstract, she'eina nitfas kol kach ba'oisiyos, that doesn't have, it's not such a wordy idea, which means the lower a concept is, the more you can vessel it in vessels, the more words it has. When you're dealing with abstract ideas, it's always hard to find words because it's abstract, which means it's more limitless, doesn't have so much words. Yet even the most abstract of the abstract idea, which is hard to find words for it, intelligence is always limited. It's not infinite. And this limitation means because that's intelligence. Intelligence is not infinite energy. It's not limitless. And that's what we mean. Earlier we were saying, how much is the intelligence coming into your leg? How much is the intelligence coming into the emotions? That's the way it's manifesting in limbs. Here we're saying it's essentially limited. Every illumination, every idea has its limitations. V'gam mugbal b'spashto shaloi. It's also limited to how far you can take the idea. Da'at po savai. A lot of times when you have a certain idea and you're excited about it and you want to explain things with it. So a person can get so excited about an idea and say, this explains this, and this explains this, and this explains this. And at a certain point, you have to stop because it doesn't explain everything. And sometimes because of a person's desire to solve the world's problems with their idea, they think that they came up, they apply the idea past the borders, even though it's a good idea, and really it should work. In certain cases, it could work. It's like a person, invented an invention, and they want it to be a cure for everything. It doesn't work for everything. So just be smart enough to keep it where it belongs. And that's important to understand about every concept. There's only so far that you can take it and apply it to so many things. It's not applicable everywhere and in everything. And that is all because of intelligence is an or pnimi, which means it's limited in its essential state. The chol seichel amiti, every true idea, yesh be'agbala. If someone is telling you they have a concept that will take care of every problem in the world, you should be suspicious that this probably not even a true idea. It's not a real seichel. Every seichel has yesh be'agbala, has its limitations. Kama sheyachol lispashit, how much it can expand. Umishu chacham gadol, people that are very wise, people that are very, very, have very great knowledge, shemevin inyan la'oim koyaser, who understand things even very deep, See, the deeper you're understanding a concept, the more flexibility you have with it. You can apply it to more scenarios. When you understand something very deeply, then you're not limited to one particular area. You have a greater range to take this idea to explain more concepts and more and different problems with this idea. And that's true. And the deeper your understanding, the broader, the more the idea can extend. However, it always has a limitation. It is not boundless and limitless. Nevertheless, it's all limited. Because it's essentially an internal light, that's why it comes with limitation. Not only is it limited, it also comes with essentially with pieces. Every idea has details. There is no idea that doesn't have details, doesn't have parts to it. There is no concept that doesn't have particles, doesn't have pieces to it. And every piece of the idea, every detail of the idea, is not equal, is different in the brilliance of the concept of how much it's shining in this part. In other words, every concept that you have, in order to explain it to someone, you have to put out certain pieces. You compose the idea by saying, you have this, you have this, you have this, and together you compose the idea. Now there are certain parts, certain particles of the idea that are more essential to the idea, and over there's a lot of the concept, a lot of the light is inside those pieces. Some of them are a little bit more on the peripheral, are more on the outside, and they're less important, but they're there by every single one of it. That's the internal and the external of the idea. In one part, it has more seichel juice, it has more intelligent juice in it. This is the inner point and the deepest point. And there's another detail, it doesn't carry so much of the juice of the intelligence, of the light of the intelligence, in such a deep way. So you see how an or pnimi always is essentially limited, it's essentially divisible, which is not the case with will, which is an or makif, which is an encompassing infinite light, as we shall still explain. As Hashem will continue in the next class. Meanwhile, let Mashiach be here now.